Hey Beaks, today we're going to finish up the cardiovascular system by talking about what the blood is, what it's made out of, and what it does for us. And if you get good at this stuff, it'll actually help you with the next unit, which is immunology and the immune system. So here we go. What is your blood all about? So blood components contribute to exchange, transport, and defense. Now, of course, we have a closed system, but with an open circulatory system, the fluid that's pumped comes into direct contact with all cells, right? Your closed system of a vertebrate contains blood, a specialized connective tissue. That's right, blood is a tissue. It's made out of a lot of different components. So blood consists of several kinds of cells suspended in a liquid matrix called plasma. So the cellular elements occupy about 45% of your blood, okay? And as you can see here, out of that percentage, almost all of it are red blood cells. And then you have some white blood cells and some platelet fragments as well. All right, and here you can see if you took a blood sample, maybe some of you are lucky enough to have seen this. If not, you know, when you go to college, a lot of times you'll play around with blood if you go with biology. And it's pretty neat when you separate it all out to the straw-colored fluid on the top and all your cellular components, and then you can break those down and look for different things. Pretty fun. But as you can see here, the majority of your blood, well, is plasma, and the main part of plasma is, of course, water, right? And that's the solvent. So you could dissolve all the good stuff inside of it. And you can see there's ions there, which we'll talk about. And these help with your osmotic balance and pH buffering, things like that. You also have a lot of plasma proteins in there. Now this one, albumin, is very important. It's not albumin. That's a little bit of a different one. But osmotic balance, pH buffering, right? Fibrinogen we talked about with different diseases with genetics, right? Like hemophilia. That's a clotting factor protein. And then you also know you have immunoglobulins, right, which are antibodies, and those are defensive, right, trying to look out for bad guys, and they'll stick to them, which we'll talk about in the next unit. And of course you have all this other stuff that travels around in your blood as well. So what about the other parts of your blood? Well, you have different types of white blood cells, or leukocytes, right? You have basophils, lymphocytes, eosinophils, neutrophils, and monocytes, and these all do really cool jobs to keep you safe. Okay, and again in immunology we'll touch a little bit more on these. And platelets, these are little small cellular components, and these help clot your blood, right? And erythrocytes, or red blood cells, which are made in red bone marrow. Okay. All right, so to get a little repetitive here again, blood plasma is about 90% water, and among its solutes are inorganic salts in the form of dissolved ions, which we call electrolytes. That's why in those Gatorade commercials they talk about replenishing your electrolytes. Sure, it's really just like salts and sugars and things like that, because you sweat them out sometimes, so you got to replenish them to keep that electrolyte balance going on, so you're functioning the way you should and all your osmotic pressure is set up correctly, things like that. Another important class of solutes is the plasma proteins, which influence blood pH, osmotic pressure, viscosity, right, how fast your blood will flow through all the blood vessels that we learned about, and various plasma proteins function in lipid transport, immunity, blood clotting, etc. Now, the cellular components of your blood, there are two main types, right? You have red blood cells and white blood cells. So red blood cells are erythrocytes, and their main function is really just to transport that oxygen on their hemoglobin, right? Whereas white blood cells, they're for your defense, right? They keep us safe, which again, next unit we'll get more into that. Platelets, a third cellular element, are just fragments of cells that are involved in clotting. Okay, they're kind of sticky if you want to think of it that way. When you have a wound, they just kind of pack into the wound. All right, so our first blood cell type are erythrocytes, or red blood cells, and they're the most numerous that you have, and hopefully you have lots of healthy red blood cells. And that's because they contain hemoglobin, which is the iron-containing protein that transports O2, right? Now, we've learned about this before. Remember in genetics, we talked about there was a missense mutation where a glutamic acid and a valine switch, and now all of a sudden your normal hemoglobin, which is quaternary, right? It has 4 subunits, 2 alpha and 2 beta chains, or polypeptides. The beta chain can get messed up, and all of a sudden you can end up with sickle cell because of this mutation. Now, sickle cell is pleiotropic, right? Because one little gene malfunction causes so many problems in your body, so that's dangerous. But we also learned about the heterozygous advantage when we were talking about evolution, because if you do have this bad form of hemoglobin, but you also have a good form, well then you're less likely to get malaria if bitten by the female Anopheles mosquito, right? Remember the heterozygous advantage. So red blood cells, very cool. They're basically just little baggies that carry oxygen around, right, through all your vasculature to your cells. And when they're mature, they don't even have a nucleus or mitochondria. They're really just like oxygen delivery cells, and that's it. I believe here you can actually see my my blood cells. That if we do this lab in class, that'd be great. This is, you can see a whole bunch of erythrocytes here, and you can also see some white blood cells here. So pretty neat, and you can see there's a whole lot of them compared to the white blood cells. Right? So pretty cool, and you'll all do this lab more than likely when you get to college. Okay, so what about if you don't have enough healthy red blood cells? Well, then you have something called anemia, and a lot of you might be anemics, right? It's a condition that develops when your blood lacks enough healthy red blood cells or hemoglobin. And this can be a very, very serious thing, okay, like sickle cell anemia, or it can just be something where, yeah, you need a little bit more iron in your diet, and hopefully your red blood cells will start to replenish themselves a little bit more than they do. Something to keep an eye on. But definitely if you don't have that oxygen pouring in the way that you should, or in the levels that you should, yeah, you could be very lethargic and sleepy. Leukocytes. There are 5 major types of white blood cells, or leukocytes: monocytes, neutrophils, basophils, eosinophils, and lymphocytes. And they function in defense by phagocytizing bacteria and debris, or by producing antibodies. They are found in both in and outside of the circulatory system. All right, so like I said, we'll talk more about these as we get into immunology. So red blood cells, white blood cells, and now you have little platelets here. And again, these are just fragments of cells that function in blood clotting. So if you have a wound, these are usually the first guys that show up and just kind of clog it up for you. And blood clotting is actually a really cool thing. Coagulation is the formation of a solid clot from liquid blood, right? And a cascade of complex reactions converts inactive fibrinogen to fibrin, forming a clot. And a blood clot formed within a blood vessel is called a thrombus and can block blood flow, right? So blood clots, when you're talking about damage, right, to a blood vessel, well, that's a great thing because you're not going to allow your blood to escape and to be leaking out. However, sometimes when clots do form, they can be dangerous, right? If this thrombus moves around or things like that. So, point is, a very cool system, and we don't dive too much into it in Bio 2 Honors, but if you want to, go ahead and YouTube some videos on how a blood clot actually forms, and the cascading of proteins that tells you what to do is really, really cool. All right, so stem cells and the replacement of cellular elements. Your blood cells wear out and they have to be replaced all the time. So whether you're talking about red blood cells, white blood cells, or platelets, they all come from stem cells in the red marrow of your bones, mainly your ribs, vertebrae, sternum, and pelvis. Right? So you're always making these new blood cells. So the hormone erythropoietin, or EPO, stimulates erythrocyte production, which is called hematopoiesis. Okay, and this gets triggered by erythropoietin, especially when your oxygen levels get lower, you're hypoxic. All right, so that was just a basic little intro on what your blood components are. This unit is really all about cardiovascular health and your heart and how it works. But sure, blood components are a big part of your circulatory system, right? Because that's what you're pushing through it. So hopefully this is helpful, and hopefully this unit wraps up nicely for you. And next we'll be on to immunology. Okay, take care.